Fresh off the red carpet premiere of M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin, an adaptation of his novel The Cabin at the End of the World, today we welcome writer Paul Tremblay to the Providence College Podcast. Paul is a graduate of Providence College, where he was a math major, the award-winning author of 8 novels now, including national bestsellers Survivor Song and A Head Full of Ghosts, which, by the way, Stephen King famously tweeted scared the hell out of him. Paul has won the Bram Stoker British Fantasy and Massachusetts Book Awards, and currently serves on the board of directors at the Shirley Jackson Awards. His essays and short fiction have appeared in the Los Angeles Times, Entertainment Weekly Online, and numerous years' best anthologies. He is also an AP Calculus teacher at St. Sebastian's School in Needham, Mass. His latest novel, The Pallbearers Club, came out last summer. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
I'm so happy to be here.
Great. First of all, I wanted to congratulate you on the success of The Cabin at the End of the World and many of your other novels that have been doing very well. But and this week, in fact, we're talking in early February. I understand you saw the full adaptation of the movie that was based on The Cabin at the End of the World at the premiere earlier this week. Can you just explain what that experience was like for you and your family going to that premiere?
It's hard, it's, as a writer, at a loss for words, but it was, very surreal, fun experience, like the whole red carpet thing. And just, because as a writer, most of the time you're sort of, on your own in your own head. It's certainly, it's only collaborative towards the end when you're working with your editor and perhaps your agent. But just to see the whole sort of Hollywood movie sort of process and machinery at work, all the actors, et cetera. But no, it was an absolute joy to be able to, experience it with my family. I'm very grateful that Universal gave us two extra tickets, for my daughter and my son. So yeah, honestly, my head is still spinning. It's a lot to process, as people say nowadays. But yeah, it was a wonderful experience. Strange. Especially sitting in the audience and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't totally stressed out. Good stress, but stress is still stress. As I watched the movie, I think I felt like I had run 10 miles after the movie, just totally wrung out.
Yeah, I can imagine. Just really one of those experiences, right? Like you didn't know you're holding your breath, and then until you start to breathe again, type of thing. That's very cool. Even kind of going full circle, if you think back, I've got to ask, what was that first conversation with M. Night Shyamalan like when you were thinking about, that this kind of legendary director was going to use your book as source material?
Yeah, so it's funny, to go backwards a little bit, the novel is actually optioned, and we agreed verbally, and when I say we, Film Nation production company and I, in late 2017, so the contract probably wasn't signed until early 2018. But it was months before the book was published. But then as typical is the case, it took a few years to even just get a screenplay going, and and having had a few other books optioned, which is amazing, but not made. In Hollywood, it's pretty typical, you hear really exciting names, but it never works out. So you sort of get inured to that a little bit. So when I first heard, Night was, sort of at the edges, interested in maybe being a producer, I was excited, but also was yeah, M. Night Shyamalan, no way it's going to happen then. But once things started happening, which was the second half of 2021, and once I had my first phone call with him, that was the first of the, oh, this is really happening moments. Yeah. So I had a 20-minute phone conversation with him in November, and it was really nice. He was super friendly and complimentary about the novel. And, I really appreciated, he was upfront with what changes he was going to make, most of them toward the end of the movie. So that was whoa, I think this is really happening. The first of a couple of those moments.
Yeah, and stepping back for a minute, just for those of us who aren't as familiar with it, what is the process for optioning a novel? Is it sounds like that decision was made even before it was published, and so is that something that you think about even when you get a nugget of an idea, or or during the writing process itself, or how does that kind of come about?
Yeah, so I definitely don't think about, oh, this is going to be a movie when I'm writing the book. It's hard enough to write the book, never mind putting other pressures like that on it. So I'm super fortunate, with the success of A Head Full of Ghosts to, by the time Cabin was about to be published, that book had caused a little bit of a stir and a buzz, and that book had been optioned. So, I have as well as a literary agent, I have film representatives as well. So basically the film reps take the book out, and pitch it to producers and other people. So I don't have to do anything other than write the book, which is great. That's all I know how to do. So when they option it, it's essentially they're renting usually 18 months exclusive access to the story, meaning like only they can try to get it developed. And then if they outright purchase the rights, that typically doesn't happen until like the day they start filming. And that's the big check. That's the big deal is when they, the options are nice. It's like free money, like, hey, they're renting the book for, 18 months. So, the optioning stuff is exciting. Like I said, it's a fine line because you do want to, and I have, celebrated the potentials of, hey, this has been an option. This is great. Maybe, because if you wait until something's made, you're probably never going to get a chance to celebrate. As much as there's so many shows and movies out there, it seems a minor miracle to me that anything gets made, just based on my experience and the experience of other writer friends who've had things optioned in it. Just everything has to go right at every step of the way for something to, to actually make it to the screen. I think I answered the question. I get rambling.
Oh,
sorry.
Absolutely. Oh no, please, I love hearing about it. The film's screenwriters, Stephen Desmond, Michael Sherman. How much interaction did you have with them during that development phase?
Yeah, so like when I signed the contract, I had have no contractual say on like getting to make comments on things, but Filmation was really cool, especially in the beginning, of saying, hey, we want your input on things. So I met the screenwriters the summer, I forget which summer it was, but I did meet them in person, super nice guys, enjoyed talking with them. And then the following spring, I got to read like their second draft because, their first draft went to the producers and the producers gave them notes. So I got to read their screenplay and they did ask for my opinion. So I sent some notes. And just about so that was 2019, I think I would say. And actually they had a director team hired or attached previous to Night. But that was going to be a hard thing to do because those directors had another movie they were trying to do. So like time wise was going to be like trying to thread a needle. So, toward the summer of 2019, it became pretty clear that those two directors weren't going to be able to do the movie. But that was when Night sort of swooped in and said, oh, he's sort of interested, maybe producing it. And I was like, whatever, we'll see, but that's also like typical of my Hollywood experience. Like with A Head Full of Ghosts, I've had multiple directors attached and it come really close to happening and then not happening. So I was just sort of used to that pattern, but obviously Night broke the pattern.
Oh yeah, very cool. Yeah. And without giving too much away, so the novel is an apocalyptic thriller about a group of doomsdayers who kind of descend on a family at their vacation cabin. Where did this idea stem from? Are you a fan of apocalyptic fiction? Does this kind of weave through your other novels as well?
So like, I don't know, as a child who grew up in the 80s, I graduated from PC in 89. For me, one of my, especially my younger person fears was always like dying in a nuclear war. So a lot of my early writing, short stories that I wrote in the 2000s dealt with apocalyptic stuff, not post-apocalyptic, but really like pre-apocalypse or during it kind of thing. So this was the first novel length where that sort of looms over the story, as you mentioned. But really the idea started with, it started with a little sketch in a notebook. Like I was trying to brainstorm for ideas because my editor actually just rejected a novel proposal I'd sent. I wasn't too crushed because even she sensed I wasn't too wild. Like I tried writing like a 30-page summary, which is way too long for this other novel idea. She's like, nah, send me something else. She's like, okay. So anyway, I drew this little cabin. I can't draw. So it was like a rectangle with a triangle on top of it. But, thinking in terms of a horror story, I looked at that and I was like, oh, that made me think of, a home invasion story because people alone in a cabin is sort of a stereotypical setup. And home invasion is kind of like my least favorite subgenre of horror, partly because it's so scary and icky to me, because it's so realistic. And there are home invasion movies I think are great, but there are other ones I think that wallow too much in the violence and stuff like that for my tastes. So I was actually weirdly excited by the challenge. Like, okay, Mr. Big Mouth, how would you write a home invasion story, that you would want to sit through? And that was really, how I sort of started thinking about it, and eventually wound its way into what it became.
Oh, that's very cool. And so I also understand that you get to go on set, right, for a couple of days. How was it going to that cabin that, started out as a sketch, and, essentially walking into your novel?
Yeah. So, I mean, if the phone call was like the first, oh, this is real moments, that was like the second, this is real. And the biggest, probably most like mind spinning was, going to, so I went to like it was like a warehouse slash production studio place on the outskirts of Philadelphia, where they built this cabin in the inside of this warehouse. And they used that cabin for the interior shots, and they had a different cabin that was outside somewhere in the woods, so I didn't go to that set. My 2 days were spent in the warehouse in this cabin. And that, in the interior of the cabin, they built a full cabin. It's beautiful. I was actually kind of, as someone who prefers like lake vacations over ocean ones, it's like, man, I was kind of bumming out. I was like, is there any way we can put this cabin like somewhere on a lake? Because it was like beautiful hardwood floors. I know that's sort of beside the point, but yeah. So when I got there, a producer brought me in, walked me through some of the offices briefly, and I thought like the cabin might be somewhere else because I saw a big giant tent outside. But no, it was in the warehouse. And we walked in. And I just walked in through the front door right before I think they were going to start shooting, and there were, Ben and Jonathan Groff like tied to chairs, and there was Dave Bautista and the other actors, and M. Night came over and gave me a hug, and that was the most like strange part. And that was like whisked off to a bedroom of the cabin, to watch on the monitor what they were shooting. So yeah, it didn't feel like I was walking. It's never felt like, oh, this is what was in my head. Cause I lived in that book for 18 months when I was writing it, and I have imagined different things. However, it did feel like, wow, this is a really cool version of the story. This is, the actors especially, I think, really get connected with the emotional core of the story and the characters.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask a little bit about that, because you talk about Dave Bautista, and his character Leonard in the book. Most people would know the actor from Drax in the Marvel movies,
Right.
and he's does many other things. But that character is written with an enormous amount of empathy, and is it struck me in reading the book that the character himself has a lot of empathy for the other characters, and then the reader, the way you've written him, I think has a lot of empathy for that character. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you weave empathy into writing books that are horror, scary thrillers, because I think that how that plays into writing these characters who may be a little outside of the box, let's say, it must be part of the calculation. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, I think I tend to try to approach all my characters from a point of empathy. And so that's different than sympathy. Empathy is the want to understand why they're acting like they're acting, or why they're, why are they making these decisions? Redmond, I would say, is probably the only character in any of my books that I've written without sort of an empathic approach to him. He was definitely, of the four invaders, I think he was the most like mustache twisting villainous kind of character. Yeah, but so it was a hard line to walk for Leonard, because obviously the biggest horror is what the family experienced, but I did think that for some of the invaders, their experience was a horror too, and the idea that they are believing that they have no choice, that they know they're doing and presenting terrible things, but they felt like they have no choice. So I thought that part of it was really interesting, to get a little of it of that from their point of view. Just the idea of believing you have no choice can be very seductive, right? Because it abdicates you of responsibility. Like if you believe you have no choice, that you have to do something, it's almost like, oh, okay, then that what I do is not my fault because I had no choice. And obviously things like that have happened in horrible, real circumstances throughout the history of the world. To me, that's believing you have no choice, or you're going to do something that breaks the social compact, right? Everyone has a choice, and deciding to not to choose is a choice kind of thing. So I did want to explore that a little bit with Leonard and Sabrina in particular, in the latter half of the novel.
Sure, and I do reading the novel, and I'm interested to see how this translates in the movie. Certainly, choice is a big part of kind of the theme that runs through this. I had read, and I'm wondering now that you've seen the movie, that that the kind of the first two acts of the movie follow the book pretty closely.
Yeah.
But then there are some things towards the end of the movie that diverge from what you had originally written. So now, having seen the movie, can you talk a little bit about that divergence, how you feel about it, and then how fans of the novel may feel about it when they see it?
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what fans of the novel are going to think. I mean, I think what I can say for 100%, like from my point of view, is that the movie is beautifully composed and shot and directed, and the performances are amazing. Um, so the ending, it's hard because I'm so biased that, like, the story is the story in my head. Any sort of fairly drastic change to the ending, even though I said the movie is very sort of I mean, the movie itself, there's a lot from the book that makes it to the movie. I don't know why I can't speak all of a sudden. So yeah, the ending, I'm still frankly kind of mulling. I think, yeah, that, like, if I was to be objective or as objective as I could be, I would say that, I definitely wear my personal beliefs on my sleeve with the novel, and I think, M. Night is doing the same with the movie in terms of what, why he went in a certain way. And there's, I don't want to spoil things, but there's an event in the novel that doesn't appear in the movie. And I think that both the event happening in the novel and the event not happening in the movie are both like a fulcrum of where the choices that are presented sort of go in different directions.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this isn't maybe a tiny spoiler, but I miss it. The movie's ambiguous for a while, but I miss that ambiguous not lasting throughout the whole thing, or the ambiguity not lasting throughout the whole thing. But at the same time, I also know for a large commercial movie, that's probably something boardrooms full of people would be like, no, you can't have an ambiguous ending.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I prefer my ending better just because it's such a personal thing to me. But at the same time, I enjoyed the movie. I think it's really good.
And thinking about that ambiguity, I think it plays into what I wanted to ask about too, is that you approach the novel with shifting perspectives. So your different scenes in the novel are told from different points of view of the characters in the book. So I think that plays into helping with the ambiguity, because you're not seeing everything from one point of view or one perspective. So did you know you were going to approach the book that way right off the bat?
Yeah, I think early on, and mainly the driver for that was I knew the opening chapter was going to be from Wen's point of view, and Wen is 7 going on 8 years old. So it's like, I can't do that first person. That would be really hard to do a 7-8-year-old person, have it being readable, not like cutesy kind of thing. So that pretty much, like, knew I was going to be versions of third person for most of the book, although there are a couple of instances where there's like a third person plural chapter, and the very last chapter actually goes to we. Yep. First person plural. So I did bounce around a little bit, but it was never so never a first person. Yeah, I mean, there are certain points in the book that I felt like it was important to have different perspectives on sort of the same event that happens, just to help sort of with the ambiguity of the story. And part of the way I wanted to present the ambiguity, which is very similar to how I did it in A Head Full of Ghosts as well, is I never wanted to feel like I was withholding information, although I'm sure a lot of people think I am at the end of this book. I wanted it to be more like, no, that you have like all this information, this glut of information coming at you, and it becomes difficult to discern what's really happening or not. And to me, that mirrors like our 21st century lives, right? Like in the age of misinformation, how do we find the truth out of all this noise, out of all this stuff that's continually thrown at us? That's kind of how I, in particular, this book, I wanted it to feel that way.
Yeah, that's so interesting. The kind of how it serves as a metaphor for that and the choices you make within that context, right?
Right.
So that's really interesting. I'm going to switch gears for a second just to
Sure.
talk a little bit about your other career, which is as a math teacher at St. Sebastian's School in Needham, Mass. You've been in there for 25 years, more than 25 years,
Yeah.
I think, right?
Yep.
So, and that path you set in motion here at Providence College with getting your math degree, and continuing on at UVM for your master's. So, what is doing it for 25 years? You must love it. I'll make that assumption. And so what do you love most about being a teacher? What does that bring to your life in a way that helps complement, what you do for your writing?
Yeah. Excuse me. I think, one of the things I enjoy the most is just the social aspect of it, getting to meet the students and, and working with the other teachers. I mean, that's something that is, obviously more collaborative, especially in the math department where, we have awesome teachers and, we'll give extra help to each other's students and stuff like that. I don't know. I felt like, teaching helps keep me young, like just being around young people, like, and being exposed to, their opinions and their hopes and their dreams and, and their emotions. It helps me remember what I felt like, as a teenager, and as a young adult, which I've used in my books. So I've definitely put my students to work. I mean, from a writer's perspective, it's always been like this daily amazing lesson in voice because, the kids will have slang in our school that's, a mix of sort of, country cultural wide, but, things are definitely Boston specific. And then there are things that are school specific. And then 3 or 4 years later, there'll be like new sets of words that may be built off the old ones because the younger kids want to have sort of their own sort of, in language with each other. So it's fun, it's fun to see that morph and change, from the writer's perspective. Otherwise, the school has been so supportive and, of my writing endeavors, never once pushed back on it. In fact, like, there was a time where like I went to a book festival in Los Angeles and they helped pay for it and stuff like that. So, they've been, part of the things that the school talks about is, is to encourage lifelong learning. So, it's, they often pay for faculty to get, advanced degrees and, it's really good to see them, it's not just words for them. They really encourage that part of it.
That's cool. It's great that you found a place like that, landed there, and have been able to be there for so long. I would say that, in some ways that seems like it plays into the mission of Providence College, in terms of this idea, when I think about, the Venn diagram maybe of those people who are AP algebra teachers and best-selling novelists, that probably that that calculation is, somewhere in the middle of that there's probably not too many people there, so you're very distinctive in that way. So I wonder if you could talk about, your time at PC, your PC education, and maybe what helped to encourage you or to inspire you to pursue these two career paths.
Yeah. So, I mean, I definitely sort of blossomed, became who I was at PC. Like I didn't have a great high school experience. I went to a big public school, was, super skinny and small and very awkward and not like very confident. So like going to Providence College was a chance for me to really start over. And it was an amazing 4 years. I really enjoyed it and have, lifelong friends. And I met my wife, Lisa Carroll at the time, and, Lisa Carroll Tremblay now at the school, so many more memories. And really the earliest startings of me thinking about writing, started with one of my last classes that I took at Providence College, which was, so I ended up weirdly like a math humanities double major because I kind of screwed up the education part of it. But as a second semester senior, I took basically like English 101 or Lit 101. So I was in there with mostly freshmen. But the Professor McLaughlin, was amazing. It was like one of those, almost like a stereotype of like, an English teacher, really connecting with a student because he was a big punk music fan and so was I. And he was able to draw that out of me into, an enjoyment of reading. So I remember in that class, we read Joyce Carol Oates's Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? And another story called Greasy Lake by T.C. Boyle. And I wrote an essay comparing those stories to something that happens in a Jane's Addiction song or something, I don't know, something
Awesome.
like, so he encouraged like the love of music. So I just remember that class specifically stories. I was like, oh, I didn't know people wrote things like this. Like it really excited me. And shortly after that, when I graduated, Lisa bought me Stephen King's The Stand. And then when I went away to UVM for 2 years for a long distance relationship, I fell in love with reading first. But it started with, Professor McLaughlin's English class.
That's great. Do you have any other favorite PC stories from the time you were here?
Oh, so like my love of punk music really started at Providence College. Working at WDOM was a ton of fun, and that's sort of actually been my first sort of passion. Really, was music. Like, honestly, like because I started messing around with guitar my senior year in Providence. I had friends teaching me stuff, and I tried teaching myself. And honestly, if I had a time machine and someone said, "Hey, you could be like a semi-successful punk musician or a writer," I'd probably choose the music. But I found out I was a better writer than a musician, unfortunately. No, it was Providence. It was where I sort of discovered myself. It might sound corny, but like the idea that, after in high school where it's uncool to try hard and uncool, which is still the case. Like you watch, it's just part of the growing up and figuring out who you are. But at Providence, it was like, oh, okay. I took a very wide range of courses, math and philosophy, et cetera. And it was like, okay, I sort of figured out it's okay to be passionate about things, specifically in the arts. And it's okay to, to want to try those things, which I did for both music and writing, and the writing stuck.
Yeah, that's great. Has PC worked into any of your novels?
With the Pallbearers Club, definitely, which came out, this past summer. There's a big chunk of the book that takes place in Providence specifically. But the book is essentially very fictionalized autobiography, but it imagines like a different path I might have taken if I had dropped out of Providence College when I was a junior to try to become like a punk musician. So there's
awesome.
definitely parts that mention PC and a lot of Providence talk, particularly Thayer Street and old clubs like Club Babyhead that I used to go to when I was at Providence. So there's a big Providence connection to the Pallbearers Club.
You mentioned the Pallbearers Club, and you said hardcover came out last year, but I think is paperback releasing in a couple of months?
Yeah, so the paperback will be releasing it in March. Yeah, the hardcover's still out there. The hardcover is kind of fun because I mentioned it's like this found memoir autobiography. So the character who's essentially me writes it, but this other character who found the found memoir, like she makes comments in the margins and crosses words out and stuff like that. And in the hardcover, that's printed as red ink. So there's two, like her comments are red ink and the regular is black ink. And the paperback, that's an expense. So the paperback, everything will just be black ink, and it'll still be cool. But the hardcover is like just a nice physical artifact. It's hopefully a fun read.
Yeah, that's great. So I know you've been so busy this year. But it's actually a reunion year for you, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
Oh,
so
I am.
Maybe, maybe for you and your class, maybe we'll see you back on campus.
We're definitely planning on it. Oh no, my wife, and friends are all excited, already talking about booking hotel rooms. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. That's great. So look forward to seeing you then. And just wanted to thank you so much for talking to us today and being part of the PC podcast and the PC family. For our family.
No, thank you. This is wonderful. I really appreciate it, Stacia.
Thank you for listening to the Providence College Podcast. I'm Stacia Walmsley with producer Chris Judge, a member of the class of 2005, who has produced more than 300 episodes of the PC Pod. Thanks, Chris. Check in on Mondays for new episodes available wherever you get your podcast.